Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I appreciate you being here today and checking out this video. A different topic I've seen a couple people talk about here on the booktube space, or maybe just the greater internet space as a whole, and that is sort of the concept of there's too many books out there, but not enough time to read all the ones that I want to read at the moment, or all of them in general. And what can I do to sort of put my best foot forward to, make sure I am reading the books I want to read while simultaneously not limiting myself to perhaps great, works in other genres or other authors you haven't heard of. So that's sort of what I want to talk about today. I've been grappling with this idea for a couple of months now, I believe, well before I started this channel, and I've still not really come to terms with it yet. So maybe this is sort of a way to get my ideas out there and flesh them out and have some discussions down with you in the comments. Let me know what resonates with you and if you've thought of this before and what you sort of think about it. So I think first things first, with the whole dilemma of too many books, too little time, what it really boils down to is sort of just reading what you want to read at the time. And that may be seen as like mood reading, or there's a bunch of different terminology for it. But at the end of the day, reading's a hobby. Read what you want to read, and don't get so caught up in the numbers game of it. I know, and I fall into this pit sometimes, that reading can be turned into a numbers game. How many pages have I read today? How many books am I gonna read this year? What's my reading goal? Things of that nature. I encourage you to not let it become the sole focus of your reading. It's good to have some goals. Yes, keep yourself accountable, things of that nature. However, if that becomes the reason for your reading, then I think you're entirely missing the point here. And so, yes, read what you want to read. And if you've been, well, obviously this channel hasn't been around for a while, but I guess if you've been here since the beginning, or if you follow me on Goodreads, my link down below, by the way, if you want to check it out, my reading has shifted on my own sort of ambition to more classic books. And that's for a multitude of reasons. You see, I've only been reading as a hobby for a little under 2 years now, and with any hobby or skill that you jump into, right off the bat, you're very impressionable. I'm still pretty impressionable in that aspect of how my reading tastes change. But when I first got into it, obviously I would just flock to what was new and shiny and grab my attention at that time. And in doing so, I didn't know what I liked and what I didn't like. And so in the process of figuring out what types of books I like to read, what genres of books I like to read, I read some that weren't for me necessarily, which is okay, because I was just flocking, like I said, to the maybe the biggest book influencers or the most popular videos or things of that nature, as one naturally does when you start a new hobby. And it took me about a year to realize that I was reading because I was reading specific books because someone else had told me to read them, not because I had any interest in them at all. And while it's good to have someone recommend a book, and I certainly recommend books all the time on here, there is an element that you have to want to read that book as well. And I don't think I had that going for me in that first year. Certainly I found many good books my first year of reading, certainly. There were a fair few of them that weren't necessarily the best. And that was a multitude of things. Maybe I didn't like the book as much as I thought I would going into it. I didn't know what I liked. Obviously I hadn't been reading for very long, and I still haven't been, so safe to say that can't be boiled down to one thing. But shifting back into like why I have focused more on classics and how it's been my own decision to do so was because of reading more contemporary popular works. Not to say popular works are bad or anything. I read many popular works. I'm working through Wind and Truth as we speak by Brandon Sanderson and loving every single page of it. But I think this just made me slow down and really ask myself, am I interested in this story or for the story's sake, or am I interested in it because someone else that I look up to is interested in it? Now, neither one of those things are bad, but I'm now focusing more on the things that I would like to read. And in doing so, I have found much more joy in reading, like with my classics books that I've been leaning more towards. It's split about 60-40 in what I'm reading now, classics versus contemporary works. I am doing that because I'm like, hey, in my very narrow-minded dude way of thinking, I'm like, hey, these books have been printed and reprinted for a long time. They're probably pretty good. But I know that falls into the same trap of like buying a book because someone recommended it. However, now I'm sort of disassociating myself from that and picking out the stories that I want to read because I think they sound interesting and things of that nature, or because they accomplish a specific goal that I have for myself, which leads me into my next point on why I started reading more classic books. I have it written down here. Was for a multitude of reasons. Obviously, I'm out of school now, so one reason to revisit some classic books or just older works in general was to revisit books that I may have read in high school or middle school that were, quote unquote classics and required reading, and seeing them in a whole different lens 10, 12 years later. And I've definitely enjoyed that process of it. Another element of that is to keep up some mental clarity, and reading harder works has been scientifically proven, and just reading in general, by the way, but especially maybe works that are outside of our common language space or language era have been scientifically proven to help boost mental clarity as you get older. And that is something I'm looking to do. Starting young, obviously, maybe a bit too young for that, but just trying to put my best foot forward in that regard as well. And also just because I like to challenge myself. Yeah, I'm not reading a book solely because it is hard. Well, I shouldn't say that, because of a book I'm about to talk about is that exact reason. Whoops. But reading books because I like the challenge aspect of it and the journey of working through it and things of that nature. So, like I said, I wasn't reading books because I thought they were hard. Well, I lied. This is one book that I want to read solely because it is heralded as a notoriously hard work of fiction. Some say maybe the hardest work of fiction. I mentioned it a couple times on this channel. Is Ulysses by James Joyce. And yeah, I want to read this book, but there's also so many cautions about reading this book. Some say it's like a good a good sort of gauge to gauge yourself against on how well read you are. I don't really care how well read I am, if I get all the Shakespearean, Homerian, Socrates, Dante's allusions that are within this text. I mean, there is some element of that, hey, I'm reading a couple of books beforehand just so I'm not going in completely blind, but I want to read this book because it is notoriously hard, and just because I want to see what all the fuss is about. I myself am interested in why people think that this is hard. I'm not reading it because, I guess I am reading it because people say it's hard, but also on my own accord, I want to see why people think it is a difficult work and want to experience that. I've sort of set myself up a bit of like pre-readings whenever I get to it. Again, this is just a hobby. This is not an assignment. If I don't feel like reading these books at this time, I'm not going to read them. I'm going to read whatever I want to read. But I picked up some books to help me into my first reading of Ulysses. And I say first reading because people tend to come to this work again and again and again over their lifetime as they understand it more, as they are more well-read, for whatever that means to you. and I think I would like to follow down that path as well. So, I mentioned in my first weekly reading wrap-up that in the mail that same day it came, the Oxford Shakespeare, and this is because this is like, yes, I want to read more Shakespeare for the sake of reading Shakespeare. I read a couple of plays in high school along the lines of, reading books I read in school to see them in a different light 10, 12, 15 years later. This is why I bought this book, but also has a second effect of being that there are a lot of Shakespearean allusions within Ulysses, and I want to understand them, and I don't want to be sort of in the dark. So I'm trying to put my best foot forward here. I would like to read maybe not the complete works of Shakespeare, but definitely maybe the bigger plays and some of the shorter stories. Things like Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, King Lear, Much to Do About Nothing, King Henry VIII. I'll create sort of a guided reading plan for myself before jumping into Ulysses. And moving on past that, obviously Ulysses is sort of a play, a parody on the Odyssey by Homer, so pick this up. This was in my sort of thrift store book haul that I got this edition for this reason, and because I want to read this book eventually. I read excerpts of it from high school. I don't remember a whole lot about it because I probably didn't even read it back then, but I want to read this on my own accord, and it has the secondary effect of, I'll call it, preparing me to read Ulysses for the first time. So that is why I bought this book. And the third book I have here, there are some allusions to Plato and some of his dialogues within Ulysses I have heard. Now this could just be smoke and mirrors, but because I haven't read the book yet, but I did buy the 5 dialogues of Plato. This was like my free book from Thrift Books, one order. This has been like probably months and months and months ago that I've read this, and I read Apology in it. Way before I started like even being slightly interested in reading Ulysses, I bought this and read Apology. I'll probably reread it again before I jump into Ulysses, but on my own accord, I wanted to read some of the works of Plato. And having that secondary effect, like I've been saying, of sort of preparing me to get some of the allusions within Ulysses. And last but not least, in my sort of reading assignments that I've made for myself to follow along, to read Ulysses, because I am starting this reading journey and reading whatever I want, and this is what I want to read, is, I always mess up the name of this, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. This I am interested in because I heard it's a fascinating story, and it sort of prepares the reader for the stream of consciousness-esque style of writing that Joyce is so known for, that is frequently found in Ulysses, which is a much larger work comparatively. So yeah, that may have been just sort of like a rambly type of video, but ultimately it comes down to read what you want to read. I'm reading classics, or I guess focusing more my reading towards classics because I have been burned by some of the more contemporary works because I wasn't reading them on my own accord. Because reading them because someone had told me to read them, and not because I also wanted to read them. Now, all of these books people have recommended to me, obviously. They are well-renowned in the book space, and someone some time in my life has recommended me to read all of these books. But the difference now is that I actually want to read them. And I think that is a change of mindset that I have just now come to realize a couple of months ago, and has made reading much more enjoyable. So, all that to say, appreciate you sticking around in this little ramble type video up until this point. Just need to get some things out in the air. I'll definitely be revisiting this video myself to see what I was thinking at this time and make sure I stay up to date with my required reading plan that I have set for myself. I'm looking forward to it for sure. Stay tuned to the channel for updates on some of my readings. Like I said, I'm working through Wind and Truth right now by Brandon Sanderson, and I'm eating up every page. So as soon as I get off of this, I will open it back up again. And yeah, appreciate everyone hanging out, checking out the video up until this point. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks, guys.